So for those who don't know me, I'm Sharon Constanson. I'm Chief Executive of Genius Methods and Genius Boards. And today we're going to be talking about governance and specifically a very narrow part of the topic on diversity within a boardroom environment. And we're going to focus today specifically on gender and age. We'll pick up all the other diversities next week. And then the third week, we'll be talking about the challenge of the chairman's leadership of a diverse team. So we'll be talking about diversities over a period of 3 weeks from different agendas, from different focus points, so that we've had a rounded view on the diversity issue. The image in the beginning of this page is quite pertinent. This is relating to the an orchestra, to music, to a symphony rather than a cacophony. And when we get to the third of these three, you will understand the direct resemblance between the musical instrument and what we're doing about good governance in a boardroom environment. But right now, that is on hold, and we're going to talk first and foremost, about some of the areas that we're going to cover in this space on diversity. So we're going to start by understanding and recognizing diversity in the first place, and the relationships it has to people, equality, but also the common diversities you tend to see in a business environment, and also the less common diversities, sometimes known as the visible and not so visible, and the importance of the non-visible ones, which are actually sometimes the more dangerous ones to get onto the wrong side of, because they're not that obvious, and you can easily get yourself into saying the wrong thing or being biased into believing the wrong thing. So it's also getting us into the mindset of diversity, the biases that are imprinted in us, on us, around diversities, and then developing the organizational approach towards diversity. And I'm going to specifically at that point in our third lecture or lesson or lecture, webinar, whatever, roundtable, that's what we were calling it. We will look specifically at the chairman's role in managing diversity to get us the maximum outcome. So if we just look back, a little bit of a quick short history lesson in terms of diversity governance evolution. How have we got to the point we're at now on the issue of diversity? So if we look at the UK Corporate Governance Code 2010, which is our first new code under, who was the Walker review, post the Walker review and post the crash. Here they were talking and focusing very much on the merit still, but asking people to, or boards to consider diversity, including gender. They didn't include any of the others. They just specifically focused in on gender for the first time. 2011, the Davies report came out, which was focusing on bringing women onto boards of the FTSE 100, which was to get that to 25% by 2015, which was just achieved, I believe. And here that you had a focus on women, again, the gender diversity. 2018 came out our current code, which is a more modern code. And there we talk about gender, social and ethnic backgrounds, cognitive and personal strengths, which is now becoming far more rounded in terms of the kinds of diversities that the code is encouraging us to look at. So we've got gender, we've got social, we've got ethnic, we've got cognitive, and we've got personal. Now, cognitive we covered the other day in the whole piece we did on the 10 quotients. We talked about cognitive being IQ. So here they're talking about IQ, but what they haven't said is IQ and EQ, which is what we understood last week is the balance that is required in amongst the other 8 quotients that we look at. So here our current code has given us a lot more broadness in terms of understanding diversities. Then if we look at the guidance relative to the annual report, this is UK Corporate Governance again, and they talk about the whole process the nominations committee has to go through in appointing new directors, in succession planning, and in developing a diverse pipeline. So all these things are now built into the nominations committee responsibility, and for organizations to actually define this clearly in their annual reports so that it is dealt with in a fair and prudent manner. So also what they request in the annual report is clarity on the diversity and inclusion policies that the organization has, and specifically how that links to strategy. So it's definitely an important issue now that companies need to know how they're going to write this, how they're going to build it into their DNA, how they're going to deliver their diversity and inclusion policy. And also the other requirement now is for not only the board, but equally senior management to show some of the diversity mixes that exist at that level. Now, if you have a look at some of the stats I'm going to show you as a little while ago, a year ago, we could see that there is still a long way to go in this diversity journey that we are on. So to begin with, there are 9 protected diversities: age, disability, gender, sexual orientation, race, religion or beliefs, gender reassignment, marriage or civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity. So these are what are known as the protected diversities. So you cannot prejudice a pregnant woman, for example, and any other of the things like religion or belief systems. These are all protected. People have their rights in this space. So the less obvious diversities are the ones that I just want us to look at, because the others we know about, we talk about it, we've seen it, we've heard it. It's nothing new there to us. But things that you see that are challenging to individuals in a group or team where they are different. For example, the whole group is married, bar one. Everyone is single, bar one, for example. So marital status becomes a potential divisor between the groups of people present, whether they are parents or not parents. Are they all grandparents? Or they're all single youngsters without kids? These are things that are important. Their education, do they have a university degree? Which university? The type of education they've had. Is it professional? Is it technical? Or is it from a specific top-end university versus middle tier? All those kind of how people compare themselves and make references to one another. The old school tie, which we understand is much the same thing. Regional heritage, where in the country are you from? Now, for example, if I was on a call and I hear an accent that I don't recognize, you immediately think, hold on, why am I hearing this different accent? And then 3 other people come onto the call who you're expecting to be on the call, and you hear they've all got the same accent. You suddenly realize where they're from. They're either Wales or they're Scotland or they northeast, northwest or whatever. And you hear the different accents. So we immediately recognize the difference as people immediately hear my accent and will pick up a potential bias, positive or negative, because of the fact they've heard an accent alone, least of all any further complexities. Backgrounds that people come from. My father used to always say, I come from the wrong side of the railway tracks. And I never understood what he meant. And when I came to the UK and people talked about different regions and somebody said something about the county my father had come from, I thought, oh, now I know what my father was talking about. Hadn't a clue until then because I didn't live here at the time. Personal presentation, how are people present themselves? Do they take care of themselves? Do they not? Do they dress professionally? Do they not? Now, obviously, in a Zoom environment, that is less of an issue, but it's not a non-issue. It is less of an issue. But in person, obviously, is very much an issue. What is your style? Can you be taken seriously? That's really what we're looking at. Is somebody a conformist or a non-conformist? And then we come back to cognitive, professional skills, experience. So if you have a circumstance where a new Ned joins a board, she's younger than the others, she's female, she doesn't come from the banking sector, and comes with a broad business experience. And she's a diversity on 4 levels and gets completely ostracized by the rest of the board. Yet none of those diversities would you consider reasons to ostracize the individual and make it impossible to do her job and to be happy as a Ned in that environment. None of the other older men who were all from the same banking experience realized what they were doing, hadn't a clue they were doing it. And even chatting to the chairman, who was very EQ orientated, didn't register what they were doing. So they had completely alienated because she doesn't know enough about the business. So if you go back to why was she employed and brought onto the board, she was brought on because they were looking for her retail and customer and business skills, and then completely ostracize her because she's not heard of a specific banking term relating to one of the products. So we all do it, and we do it so easily, and it's the subtle stuff that really hurts the individuals. So be so careful of our prejudices and our behaviors as a result of them, and catching ourselves up quickly, and knowing the things that we've learned about bias, all the other stuff we've been sharing. You will realize that we can and should be a lot more careful about recognizing the value of diversity and not fighting it. The risks of driving unintended outcomes is always a problem when you focus on something very, very specifically. So if we focus very specifically on gender, or we look very specifically on something in that way, what is the unintended outcome that is likely to occur? And if you have a look at the number of FTSE executive directors that are female, it is less than half the board female directors, if you look at them in number. Now, an executive team is usually equal or bigger than a board team, and yet you have got less than half the same number of women. So we've focused on one thing to the exclusion of something else, which is not really what we need to do. We need to focus on the pipeline. So now our governance codes are talking about the pipeline and focusing on making sure that they are looking at the executive level as well as the non-executive level, so that we can build the competent people that can be available in business, but equally in the board. Now, there's some studies, and I think it's in this section that we're going to cover, on the impact on decision-making of having diversity on the board. So therefore, if we're talking about that at a board level, equally, that is as equally important at a executive level for all the same reasons. There's no reason why it is any different in any way. So I picked a board. I thought, okay, let's pick one of our FTSE 10. So I picked number 2. I think they're still number 2. They're between 2 and 3 these days. It used to always be number 1, is BP. So I had a look at their board because they're so proud of their gender balance. They've got 33% women. Their ethnic diversity is 0, and their age diversity is 0. Now, I can't really find visually their beliefs or their sexual orientation. I can't see any of the others who are parents who are not. I can't see all the others. They're not visible to me. But on the immediately visible attributes, they pass on 1 and fail on 2, hopelessly. So the focus on gender is one of the major issues. The unintended outcomes is we've done it to the exclusion of building other diversities into our boards. So it is important to make sure that we look at the broader diversity at the time that we are looking to skill up individuals. There was a list of diversities that were prepared by Mannix and Neal back in 2005. And they broke it down into different categories. So they had the social category. So I remember the ones we talked about: visible and protected, and the invisible, not necessarily protected ones. So here under social, we have race, ethnicity, gender, age, religion, sexual orientation, and physical abilities. So fairly similar to our protected group. And then we've got things like, which are now, they're not visible, differences in knowledge and skills. You can't see that when you look at somebody. You will determine it when you engage with them. And you're looking at educational, functional knowledge, information expertise, training, experience, and abilities. So these are the diversities that we're bringing. So it's important that we look at a diversity of someone who's got math, someone who's got finance, somebody who's got technical knowledge on the industry, somebody who's got EQ and communications, and we bring this together to make a holistic, valued team. Differences in values and beliefs, so it's cultural or ideological. Can't see them either. Personalities, cognitive, affective and motivational factors. So here we're looking at characters, people who are very, we talked about type 1 thinking. People are very upfront, very outspoken, very extrovert. You get those that are introvert, slow thinking, reflective, all these different kinds of ways in which our brain works. So there's that as well. And then we've got organizational and community status differences, is where do people fit on the status ladder, for want of a better word, or class ladder, or any other form of ladder that people want to provide. And one of them that's interesting is, who do they know in the world? They always want to know, who do you know? And it's quite an important one in society. Where do you fit into the community? Yeah, what is your title? Yeah. It's very important, this who am I? What's my jizz? So these are all very important diversity considerations that we really have to think further than gender and age and ethnicity. And who's it important to? This is important to internal stakeholders. So it's who's on the staff. Does the staff represent diversity? It's also important, and also does our board represent the diversity of our staff? So if we've got an organization that is primarily blue collar worker, do you have somebody who understands a blue collar worker at the boardroom level? Or is everybody so white collar they haven't a clue what's going on in a blue collar world? External stakeholders, investors, shareholders, customers, all of them are really interested in your diversity behavior and outcomes. So it is important. Governance and compliance, we've got a code. We need to be able to adhere to our code as well. And we also know that from the studies we've done to date, you understand the value it has to decision making, to conversations that are had in the boardroom, to bringing different lenses and perspectives to every conversation, that you are ultimately going to come to the right decision for the organization. It might take a few moments longer, but you are making the right decision because the conversation has been robust. Also the importance is the leadership, so that all diversities have a fair airtime in the boardroom environment, which means others have to be respectful. If there are many diversities, it's not one person having all the voice, whoever that might be. So these are the people who are going to be watching you. And when in a conversation I had not that long ago with one of the big investment firms, pension funds, and they, like me, see a lot of boards, they see a lot of organizations. They can, in their waters, sense which boards are working better and more effectively than others. And they are the ones who are very, very interested in the climate change, the ESG, the diversity, the gender, all these things. And they are starting to push boards much harder from the outside than they were doing. They were pushing, there was pushback, but now that pushback doesn't have the same degree of power relative to the external and internal demands that are now being made. And in this COVID environment, this agenda has gained a lot more strength, and boards are having to accept that there are things they've got to do differently and not just lip service to it. They've actually got to do it. I've seen women be taking onto boards, or younger people brought onto boards, where they have absolutely, you can see they've done it because they've had to, not because they embrace the individual. And I've got an example where a young female, digitally orientated woman was brought onto a board that has had an excellent, excellent chairman. They all accepted her, not a problem, not a question. She was embraced, she was supported, she was inducted, she was contacted. everybody considered her part of the team immediately. Another circumstance where they brought on an engineer and an infrastructure specialist, both female, into an organization that was in the, you call it, manufacturing world. So they were optimally skilled, even though they were women, to be in the industry. In the end, actually more technically competent than the male NEDs that were on the board, who'd been on the board anything up to 9 years plus. So it became an us and them between everybody. And they were not respecting them because they were female. How could females know anything about manufacturing, yet they were more qualified and more experienced? And CEOs in both cases, not that long ago, and had run companies in the manufacturing space. But they were ostracized completely. They could hardly do their job. Fortunately, board evaluation unleashed that lock and that anchor that was in the way, took out the perspex wall and brought those individuals back to within the boardroom environment. There's having a look at some evidence base, because people say, okay, so what, I've heard. What, but have I got any evidence? There are people who want evidence. They're not comfortable with listening to experience. So some research has been done that female directors enhance board independence. So it's the board's independence of decision-making and the independence of individuals that are thinking independently within the boardroom environment. So women are more likely to think on their own feet than to get absorbed into groupthink, far less likely to get groupthink or hierarchical structures to start defining how they behave. So that's a very strong point for bringing women in at this point into a boardroom environment. Apparently, according to this research, women take their role more seriously and they are more prepared. They've read the papers to a greater degree. They've thought through things. They think outside the box about things that are going on around them. And quite often you will have a NED who reads an article about A, correlates and think, actually, if I think about that, the impact on that as in terms of a pestle impact on another organization they're on the board of, and will proactively feed that information across. Find that, according to the study, women do that far more than men do. They're also more likely to ask questions. Now, you know, if a woman gets lost, she asks her way. If she thinks she's going to get lost, she might ask her way to stop wasting time. Men will get lost and get there late eventually because they're not going to ask anybody. It's almost that psychology that we carry through. And men, because of the differential, hierarchical, natural comfort zone, will tend not to ask the most difficult questions of each other, which doesn't make any logical sense. But I have to say, I have seen it in practice where they don't. And I'm not sure if I shared this with you guys, but working with a senior partner of a legal firm, one of the top 5 legal firms in the country. And this legal guy was really upset with a certain decision that was sort of evolving to happening. And anyway, I observed the meeting where this issue came to a decision. They had the final debates. They all talked about it, and it went through with a unanimous decision. And I'm thinking, I clearly misunderstood this man. I must have went back to my notes. My notes didn't indicate that I'd misunderstood him. So I phoned the director and I said, I need some help understanding, because you specifically told me that you had a problem with this. And if you had a problem with it, why did you vote in favor of it? He said, I would never indicate to the chairman that I thought differently to him. Now that is a senior executive on a senior board making a major business decision that he actually fundamentally disagreed with. But he approved it because that's what you do on the board. The chairman wants it, and that's the way we go. That is not the role of a non-executive director. So we do want independence of thought. And here, this is interesting. I came across this research that totally correlates what I'm saying. If you put one diversity on the board, like one woman, and you then expect miraculously change to be there, it's almost impossible. One woman is going against that tide is such a battle and very, very difficult to achieve change. One woman versus the entire existing board, of which they are now the newbie as well. Two is what I've always recommended. If you're going to bring on a diversity, bring on two of them, because they've got a far better chance of delivering a fundamental change. This research says you need three. So obviously then you have to have a decent sized board. So obviously relatively 2 to 3 diverse numbers of a diversity or collective of diversities before you're likely to see a difference in the way the organization and the board is behaving. So there's a study done by McKinsey, and the question I ask is this correlational, is this causational? Is it because, therefore, it's happening, or is it happening and therefore is causing the right outcome? The statement here is the top quartile of diversity present outperformed the bottom quartile by 15% in financial terms. So in other words, the boards that had gender diversity were showing much better returns than those that did not. And boards with gender diversity have outperformed those without. So the one had a diversity present, the other one had specifically a gender diversity present, and outperformed those that didn't have a gender diversity by 16.2%. Now, we all know you can lie with statistics, but I think the point here is, do good boards recognize the value, or does the diversity bring the bottom line return? It's probably a chicken and egg, and it's probably a bit of both that they have to happen together. So the question then asked in the McKinsey report is why? It does increase your talent pool to a much bigger pool to source from, even though talent management organizations are really struggling to find people of diversity to be able to fill these roles. So either their databases haven't updated yet, or they're actually not looking hard enough, because there are absolutely plenty of diversity competencies out there where they are bringing a diversity. This is the part that I found really interesting when I was going through this. 6 out of 10 university graduates are women. Now that's more than 50%. 51% of the UK population is female. Now that one was an interesting one, so it's a bit like a Brexit number. 70% of household purchasing decisions are made by women. And yet we are sitting in a circumstance where we get to the board and we struggle to get one female on the board. Where have all those 6 out of 10 university graduates gone? Yeah, this is the part that I find really quite frustrating for us, for women, in terms of, is it because they've given up the fight? Have they gone and had families and not come back? Yeah, what is it that has occurred that's taken so many of them out of the working environment? So there's also a research that was done on a more women environment, or a greater average of men. And they did some scoring of the empathy scores when you had more women on the board, and the empathy scores that they got when they had less women on the board. So they found that the more women that existed on the board, the higher the empathy score of that board. In other words, the better ability to listen, to communicate and debate and to have a conversation. The research also indicated that the board itself engaged more proactively, had better conversations, and were able to express themselves more competently and that's because of the higher empathy that you had, and with the greater number of women. So this has been something that I remember a chairman saying last year to me in quite a patronizing way. He said, actually, I've realized the women have got something intelligent to say. They have got something to add, which is really sad that somebody is saying it in that way. But someone who has blocked women from the boardroom his entire business career, and he's now well into his 70s, and has been on this particular board. I think he was about 6 years at that point, still had another 3 years to go on the board. And at this point, we're educating him into the new environment of having a diversity mix. And the interesting thing is, after a period of about 18 months of having one woman, now 3 women on his board, he was actually starting to see that they were bringing value, and didn't see that they had a place in his boardroom before that. So it's the social intelligence, And also they're saying in the study that women are better team players. They'll work more cohesively and constructively in a team. So guys, please don't stress. We all love you and we all enjoy working with you. But it's how do we blend the strength of the natural male gender and the strength of the natural female gender? And that natural that I'm saying on some studies is not polarized. It's far closer to the median than this study and this information gives us clarity on. So in one study that I had a look at on EQ, for example, the women rated at 52% higher EQ than the 48% men. So it is like a Brexit vote. It's close. It's not 25 versus 75 in any way. The Parker Review was focused on bringing in one person of Black, ethnic, and other minorities onto boards. So it's 1 by 21, which is beyond 1 by 21. We get the words correct. And he gave some statistics that also I found quite interesting in terms of how many people of ethnicity have not made it to the UK boards. Only 1.5% of the total director population were both non-white and UK, for example, on the FTSE 100. So the FTSE 100, 1.5%, so 1.5 people. I'm not quite sure how he gets the 1.5, but 1.5 people. But obviously it's probably because you've got, no, it's not 100 because you've got multiple numbers of directors on the 100 boards. But 1.5% of their population were UK non-whites. And if you have a look at the 1,087 director positions, only 8% in total were by people that were of a non-white color, ethnicity. 7 companies accounted for over 40% of the non-whites in the directors of the FTSE 100. And they also gave that there's 53, so it's more than 50% of the FTSE 100 do not have a person that fits under the BAME category, which is interesting that it's still very much a club and a people of a kind, and the evolution and education of the diversity people coming up through our schools and through our universities is lagging behind at this point in time still. And the other thing that the report indicates that the workforce has changed dramatically over the past 40 years, and they are predicting that by 2051, over 30% of the UK population will be of some form of ethnic or migrant background, which is a very high percentage. So we should be seeing that diversity coming into our staffing, our internal stakeholders, our external stakeholders, and our boards. And just for a little bit of fun, I put up a slide that I came across the other day, which was research in the 4 regional geographic areas of Africa as to where their gender and particularly one is on gender actually, and whether they're in line management or whether they're in executive management or whether they're in the workers. And you can see their top category is balanced, which is purple. And I looked through it a few times yesterday and I cannot find any company in Africa that is classified in the balanced category. There are those that have reached a critical mass, which are the red ones, where you'll see some red and yellow women sitting in the top line of each organization. But you can see there are a number, like the very last one, there are no women that have reached executive level whatsoever. So it's interesting. If you look also in the North region, there's only 2 companies and 4 others. And the 4 others have also, once again, got 0 females that have reached certain executive levels or board levels. So it's not a UK problem. It's not a European problem. It's a global problem. So it's something that we have across all societies, across all industries, across all continents that we need to deal with. So it is real and we need to embrace it. And we need to help in that education and mentoring. Be available to mentor people of a diversity and see how you can help them. So the greater review that we're going to look at in next week will be age, country and culture diversities, social backgrounds, and the deep-seated diversities that are inbuilt into the individuals, some of those that we've identified through today. And we're then going to have a look at a company or a board of directors or a executive or a chairman having the right diversity mindset to be able to embrace this new diversity norm that we're working towards. The third session, we're going to look at opportunities and challenges in the leadership. So here we're going to take the orchestra as our analogy to running an effective board with all the diversities present. So we're doing a bit of theory, some more theory, and then, so now what do we do about it practically, and how are we going to manage it as a chairman or a chief exec of an organization? We're also going to be doing the workshop around the Easter period, and depending on how many are showing an interest, we will have one before and one after. If there's not a big enough interest, we'll have just the one after Easter. It'll fall, I think it's on the Thursday after Easter. And then we resume our nuggets on the 12th of April again, but we've got next week and the week after first. So we've got 2 more to go. So we all now know about the gender one. We've heard a lot about it. It's almost an overplayed fiddle. We're almost bored of it. But if you look at the stats, we still have so much work to do in society to absorb the gender balance more efficiently. There is a high resistance to change. There must be, otherwise we would have got further quicker than we have done. But I think the important message I want to leave with you is gender is not the only one. It is one of them. But the one that's more important is the broader diversity of many different lenses. Now, we've looked at how people are biased and influenced. We've looked at the different quotients. We've looked at the various ways in which we can bring diversity to the board, not only the diversities we've talked about in today's session. I see we have got a couple of questions that have come through already. Best Leaders by Egon Zender's research apparently is men with female daughters. And this actually I have come across and seen in quite a lot of places, and that force for the 35% club actually was run by men who had daughters of about to become employed and sort of working up their career ladder. And suddenly dad actually felt that their daughter had equal chances, but in the boardroom wasn't behaving the same way. So it was creating an alignment of a view you had in one space to the greater business engagement you were doing, and actually realizing that that alignment to your daughter could actually be applied to across all women or other diversities that existed. Diversity at a board does allow for a greater absorption of information, because you've got a very different sets of minds, so they can intuitively be better at certain things. Now, the more you have diversity of relevance, so that you don't have chaos, please, we'll talk about chaos in the third session. We don't want to get to that. The relevance of having people that their diversity is of value to the organization, therefore that will help the staff messaging, the representation of the internal stakeholder, the people in the organization, the executive on the board. So it is very relevant to have that diversity that can speak for the diversities that exist within the staff environment. There's no point having a diversity on the board that has no relevance to the customer, no relevance to the product, no relevance to the staff. Then why have you got the diversity? Something must be brought of value and relevance by a diversity that's on the board. But having women on the board, invariably, if you look in organizations, a lot of organizations obviously does have it depends, a far greater balance of male and female within the managerial and lower levels. It's when you go sort of senior management and above that imbalance starts to step in. So it does help women who are within the organization to feel more supported if there's a woman on the board. And quite often they will look to that person as a mentor very quickly as a group of people, even if they don't engage with the person as directly. So understanding your employees and the correct target markets, I think Susan, I have covered that to quite a large extent in the conversation that I've just had, so I'm not going to directly repeat that one. And a blind spot, point is a invisible diversity a blind spot? A blind spot is you have caused the blockage, you've got blinkers on. If you take your blinkers off, they might still have that diversity, but you can't see it. I could not see the religious belief of one of my team. It was not made visible. I did not have the blinkers on. It's just not visible. It wasn't made visible, wasn't made known. I hadn't asked about it because it's not the sort of thing one discusses. So be careful of understanding a blind spot is something that is more self-inflicted than the other person having it, but it's not something that is visible. Like some people have got curly hair, some people have got straight hair. It's just not visible to me. It doesn't mean it's a blind spot. So I hope that makes it more understandable. Talking here about the feedback loop in terms of gender and race. Effectively the feedback loop is if you're sitting with at a point in the cycle, male, pale, and stale, being harsh of the category, it's very different for the diversity loop to work through that, because that is what is existing already. And you need some change at that place to allow the feedback loop to be more successful and continuous improvement and development in that feedback loop. I've got through most of the questions. I've got through all the questions, sorry, not most. We have run on longer. I've just looked at the time. I must have been having fun. So next week, we will look at the rest of our diversities. And then I did say incorrectly that we were doing 2 more before the break, but we're not. We've got 1 session, then we've got a break because of Easter, and I can't make the 29th. Thanks, everybody.